Well, hi everyone, and let me just turn the microphone around. I don't know if you can see that, but there you go. And welcome to Adam's Music Box, where today we're going to talk about someone who really knew how to get the best sound out of his microphones and put some of the very best musicians in front of them. That man is, of course, Quincy Jones, who is one of the true Renaissance men of the music industry. There's a shorter list of things in music he didn't do than things he did. He played instruments, multiple instruments, from brass instruments to every keyboard imaginable. He was a composer. He was an arranger. He was a producer. He worked with engineers. He was an executive. He was a manager. He was someone who scouted and discovered and helped to shape talent. And if that wasn't remarkable enough, because there are very few people in the music industry that fit that bill. I mean, Herb Alpert was a Renaissance man, but even he didn't hold as many positions. I hate that term when we're talking about the arts, but even he didn't have his hand in as many pizza boxes as did Quincy Jones. No idea where that metaphor came from. But this is what's really, really interesting about Quincy Jones. How many musicians can you name that got their start in the big band era, playing in big bands, arranging and conducting and putting together big bands, and who, in the middle of his career, let alone the end of his career, is responsible for the number one selling pop record of all time, Michael Jackson's Thriller? That's one hell of a career, especially when you consider that in the intervening eras, he arranged and conducted multiple albums for Frank Sinatra, as well as the other members of the Rat Pack, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., etc. He recorded, at my count, I think around 20 very successful soundtracks, which covered so many genres from funk to bossa nova to Latin to other forms of Brazilian music to soul to traditional jazz to big band to funk to electro funk, and the list goes on. So many different television soundtracks, Ironsides, The Dude, one of I think my personal favorite soundtrack, which was in 1980, the song Velas, so very beautiful, featuring Toots on the old harmonica there. It's an extraordinary career. Um, Even he's one of these people that really defies any era and defines. So he defies and defines. And let me explain what I mean by that. Today, with the music industry as contracted, as shrunk as it is compared to what it was at the end of the 20th century, it's difficult to imagine someone doing all of those things because there's simply less to do in the music industry. At the same time, more is expected of every individual within the music industry. For instance, if you're forming a band, you're not able to afford a glitzy songwriter, so you really have to write your own songs, you and your fellow bandmates. It really helps in terms of budgeting and in terms of getting things done if you know how to record it, if you know how to produce it, if you know how to engineer it, if you know how to market it, if you know how to arrange a concert tour, albeit a small one. And so, in that sense, Quincy Jones was the everything man in an age when the music industry could afford to be specialized because it had the financial weight and it had the cultural weight to do so. Yet Quincy did it all. And today you see people doing it all, but at a much smaller level. And so, while they have to have their hands on all those pizza boxes, they don't have the genius necessarily. Tell me if there is someone who you think approaches Quincy's genius, but I don't think they have the genius, and they certainly don't have the ability to be as prolific as he was. He's been around for a long time, born in 1933, and he started working with some of the classic big bands in the early 50s. While the 30s and 40s was generally considered the classic age of big bands, many of the greats were still very much alive and very popular into the 50s, and Quincy Jones played with all of them. And this led to his rise as a record executive, first at Mercury, and he eventually formed his own production company that he did records for the rest of his life. it really takes a great vision to be able to adapt to so many styles. Because just think of it from the perspective of music listening audiences. There are some audiences who are less adaptable than Quincy Jones was as a composer and an arranger. So, for instance, oh, I only like AOR rock and I won't listen to anything else, it sucks. Or I only like bebop and hard bop jazz, anything else sucks. Or I only like jazz fusion and anything else sucks. There are people like that, less today probably than before, because we're so much more interconnected on a personal level to people that we can be influenced by. Some are called influencers. In other ways, we're more segmented, but that I actually talked about in another video. But in any era in music, there are people who allow themselves to be pigeonholed into a certain genre or style as listeners. And Quincy Jones never allowed that to happen to him as a maker of music. The diversity is really, really incredible. Put on the live album that he did with Frank Sinatra in Las Vegas, Sinatra at the Sands, classic big band backing of Sinatra singing through what were his greatest hits of the time and some of the hits that took him right through the rest of his life. Absolutely amazing. We all know the song Soul Bossa Nova. If you don't know it by name, you will know it because although it was written in the early 60s by Quincy Jones, it was reprised by Mike Myers as the theme to Austin Powers. He has writing credits all over the Thriller album. He produced it, responsible for putting the arrangements together, bringing in the instrumentalists who helped give that album a unique sound, including Eddie Van Halen, a favorite of this channel. There's actually a funny story that Eddie tells. When they were in the studio, the Van Halen brothers were in the studio, and he gets a call from someone who says, "This is Quincy Jones." And Eddie goes, "Fuck off," thinking it's a friend of his playing a joke. And the guy calls back again, phone goes back down. And the third time he goes, "Look, I really am Quincy Jones. I'm here with Michael Jackson." I'm not sure what studio that may have been. It might have been at Havenhurst, the Michael Jackson's house, or it may have been at one of Alan's side studios, Ocean Way. Because Thriller was recorded in several places. So he brought Eddie Van Halen in. He really knew he was the man whose Rolodex, if you're under a certain age, you won't know what that means, but his contacts in the music industry were endless because everyone respected him. Because at the end of the day, musicians respect versatility. It shows that your talent isn't something that happened accidentally. It shows you that your talent isn't something that you sort of refined, but then kept at a stagnant standstill. It shows that you're able to take your knowledge of music theory, knowledge of the existing musical instruments, a hunger for knowledge of the new musical instruments, such as the polyphonic synthesizers all over Thriller, and use all of that wisdom and experience to create something new, to reinvent genres, to reinvent production style. And so, of all of the many talents of Quincy Jones, I would say that his versatility is what made him most unique of all. Because a Quincy Jones production from the late 50s is going to sound very different than a Quincy Jones production from the early 90s. Not because he was chasing trends, but because he had a huge hand in shaping them. And that's something that truly is legendary. The ultimate Renaissance man? Probably. I'd be curious to know in the comments if you know of another who was that versatile in terms of stylistic palette and in terms of all of the different roles he played within the industry. Like, subscribe. We'll see you next time. Take care.